Welcome everyone to this lecture. In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at parallax backgrounds, what parallax backgrounds are, and how they work in games, in some example games that we'll be looking through. So first, we'll be looking at parallax background. Now, a parallax background, think of it, I want to use two examples. We'll use Flappy Bird and the Dino game that you will play or can play if your internet is not working on Google, right? So I really like the Flappy Bird example, but not everyone might know it. So I'll try to use both as a reference. Now in Flappy Bird, we have our screen here. So this is our phone, and we have a little bird. This is our little bird. Draw some wings. I'm not an artist, you might be able to tell. Now in Flappy Bird and in the Dino game, there are two components to this game. There's the pipes, or the obstacles, and then there's also the background. Now, let's see if we can draw some maybe buildings. I don't know. Those will be the background, right? And maybe a sun or something like that. Right, so we have the background and some pipes, some obstacles. Now, this is common this is also consistent in the Dino game as well. So the basic idea of Flappy Bird or this type of game is that the player or the bird does not actually move. What he does is goes up and down, right? There's gravity, so the player or the bird can fall down and go to the ground, or he can go up and tap the screen, right? Or jump. Now in our game, of course, we'll be doing a jump, so we're not going to be able to kind of flap like our bird, but it's the same idea. So we'll probably hit spacebar and allow our player to jump. Now, the way this works is that our player does not actually move forward. What happens is that the background that you see actually moves backwards. And this is using something called parallax background. Now, this concept, parallax background, is how that works. That is what parallax background is. It's basically the background moving backwards. And then there's a parallax behind this screen that gets mirrored. And every time that this background on this side goes off the screen, it basically goes all the way back here. And that is pretty much it. It just basically resets. Now, the pipes or the obstacles are the same thing. However, generally they will move at a different speed to give that parallax effect. So what parallax is, think of different layers. So it's kind of hard to draw, obviously, but think of this layer here, and this layer here. Right, so we have 1, 2, 3, and all these layers kind of create this effect so that if my eyeball is over here, I can see some sort of cool effect using all three of these layers. And that is what a parallax background is. That's what we're going to be doing in our game. So we'll be essentially adding a few layers to probably and creating this different effect where the pipes or the obstacles, in our case, we'll be using platforms, will move at a different pace than the actual background. So similarly, you can apply this to the Dino game as well. Now, we'll actually go into this much later, or a little later throughout the course, but we will have a little bit of an issue with the actual platform spawning, because the platforms are not going to be exactly parallax. They're going to be doing something called object pooling. Now, this will be a little different because when the obstacle goes off the screen, we do kind of want to bring it back, but we want to randomize it. So it's a little different than parallax because parallax implies that this background is the exact same that we're mirroring over here, whereas the obstacles are not. So let's head over to Godot and take a look at how we can do that. So in this lecture, we took a look at the concept and idea of parallax backgrounds and how they generally work in many other games. And then in the next lecture, we'll be taking this concept and this idea that we just learned and applying it inside of Godot. So I will see you guys there. Welcome back everyone to this lecture. In this lecture, we'll be going through parallax backgrounds and applying it into Godot. So in our project, we need to first create a 2D scene. So let's create this 2D scene and name it world and save this in a folder that we're going to create called scenes. Let's save this and let's run this so that we know it works. There we go. And you might have to select it as select current as well. Here we go. Now, the first thing we need to do is look in our nodes and add a parallax background. Now we'll see that we have two options. We have parallax background and parallax layer. So first we're going to need a parallax background. This will be the core of our background. Now we'll actually need the layers. So we're going to have two layers, but let's set up one first. So let's rename this to Parallax BG. And we're not going to rename the parallax layer, but in here, we're going to, you can either search up background, or you can find it in the images. And we're just going to drag this in. And if I drag this into our parallax layer here, and I make sure that I can actually scale this properly. So what I'll do is I will turn on the grid and just scale this properly to the screen. Now you can see that nothing's being duplicated. So what we want to do is head over to the parallax layer, head over to motion, and we're going to mirror this at x equals 384. Now the reason it's going to be 384 is wrong, actually, because we need to actually scale this at 512. So 512. Now you'll see that it gets layered. So if you actually move this more or less, you'll see that it gets layered a little. So if you just click this and move the mouse left or right, you'll see that it moves. So let's bring it back to 512. There we go. Because here is where the split off is. And if you recall in our project settings, here we go, from our window, that is the width of our screen. Now you can see that it's mirrored. However, if I play, nothing's happening, nothing's moving. So what I want to do is I want to move this. And so I can do this in my parallax background by using the scroll and offset. You can see that if we change this, it might not work in the actual thing. So we might have to actually only do this through code. So yeah, let's just do it in code. So let's head over to our parallax background. Make sure you select this and we'll add a script. Let's put this in a new folder, and I'm going to put it in a new folder called scripts. Save it in here, open, and create. Now in here, I'm going to delete all this code, and what I'm going to add is an onReady variable, and this is an integer. I think I misspelled this, onReady, there we go. And we're going to call it, I have to actually give it a name, speed. So we'll say speed is equal to, let's say 50 for now. Now what we can do is in our process function, which we'll have to add again, so we can say process, we'll say scroll offset. So there's two options, well there's quite a few options, scroll base offset or scroll offset. We'll do scroll offset, and we'll say x minus equals speed times delta. And now that is it. So if I head back to my 2D scene and hit play, you'll see that my background moves. And feel free to test it. If you just wait, you'll see that this ends up being duplicated. Now, one more thing we're going to add is water. So let's head over to our parallax layer and duplicate this, or by hitting Control D or Command D, I believe on Mac, you can duplicate this right here. And instead of a background, we're going to use something called a texture rectangle. Now let's add this by searching up text rectangle. There we go. Now in here, what I'll do is I'm going to find the water and drag this into the texture. Now what this texture rectangle does is it's a pretty cool node that allows us to actually duplicate something based on the stretch. So we can, instead of scaling this, so when I stretch this, you can see it gets stretched, right? But if I go to the stretch mode and select tile, you'll see that it now tiles the stretch. So now if I bring this down, and let's make sure that we turn off the grid here, make sure we scale this properly, and then just drag this to the right over here, and then let's pop this into the parallax layer, and now it gets duplicated, right? So now if I play, you can see that the water moves as well. However, if you recall from our previous lecture, we want to create a weird effect where the water moves at a different speed. And we can achieve this by scaling the parallax layer in the motion. So if, let's say we want the water to move a little faster, I can just enter in 1.3 for the x and make sure that the y is 1. So let's make sure we unlink this so that it's broken. And we have 1.3 and 1. So now if I replay this, you'll now see that the water moves a little faster than the background. All right, so now we have this cool parallax effect between our background and the water. All right, so in this lecture, we've covered how to create a parallax layer and background inside of Godot. In the next lecture, we'll be covering the player. We'll probably just create the player, add some gravity, and that'll be it. So I will see you guys in that lecture.